another edition of Give Us Back Our Country. This is the show where we discuss the current issues and discuss why and how we need to make our politicians truly accountable between elections to you, the people, 24/7. Today we're joined by two special guests, David.
Yes, Pauline Hanson is one of Australia's most well-known and certainly most courageous politicians. Her reputation and recognition extends beyond Australia. Her political career began in 1994 and her involvement in Australian politics continues today. Welcome, Pauline.
Thank you, David.
Peter Manuel is the founder and the Executive Director of Food Producers, Landowners Action Group Australia, Flag Australia Inc. He's leading a national fight against the increased bureaucratic control of farming in Australia, which appears to be determined to end farming as we know it today. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, David.
There's a freeze on new coal seam gas mining applications. And the bill has been introduced to amend the Native Vegetation Act. And there's continuing bad news about the actions of the South Australian National Resources Management Board. Peter, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, the Natural Resource Management Board, we've got a Natural Resource Management Act of 2004 that's absolutely destroying our ability to grow food on our freehold properties. This act is one of the most draconian acts I've ever seen. And I'll just give you a little bit of an example what's in that act. If we have a look at section 127.6a, for an individual for non-complying is a $35,000 fine. Last year, the Labor government, the state Labor government in South Australia, wanted to increase that to $700,000. If you're a family company, section 127.6a is currently a $70,000 fine. Last year, the Labor government in South Australia wanted to make it $2.2 million. Flag Australia's lobbying stopped that. It is still currently $35,000 non-complying for an individual, which is far too much. And if you're a family company, it is $70,000. Also in that Natural Resource Management Act, section 69, why does an environmental bureaucracy need to seize our financial documents? I thought the Taxation Department gets those.
Yes. Peter, just on one thing.
Yeah.
I know that you obviously have dams on your property, but you have to have something called the low flow bypass, which seems to me to not allow you to really fully utilise your dams.
Well, we call them no-flow bypasses, and that's exactly what they do. They don't let water into our dams, and by the way, they want us food producers to pay for them ourselves, and they are very, very costly. So farmers haven't got the money to do it anyway. We're finding it very, very difficult to put food on the table as it is. So if I went to the bank and asked the bank for a loan of, say, $50,000 to put a low-flow bypass on the dam, you know what the bank's going to say? Well, is this going to increase productivity? Of course it's not. It's going to reduce our stock numbers. So we're going to have less water in our dams to water our stock, which in turn feed the people.
Is this to get more water into the ocean?
No. This is for environmental flow.
Uh-huh.
But our creeks, it doesn't matter what you do in the summertime, the creeks that normally dry up will continue to dry up. This is just a way of a certain group of people that want to restrict our food bowl. And I hate to say this, I think there's a different agenda here and a world reduction in human population. Now that might sound pretty harsh, but when you look at everything that's going on with the stipulations that are being put on farmers, I can't see any other outcome.
When I was down there, you pointed to me to what you've been told you had to plant. That's prickly acacia, right down to from the roads down to the waterfront. What's that for?
Well, I haven't done that, but the Acacia paradoxa, we call it a kerosene bush because it's highly flammable, it just explodes. So why would we plant that on our creeks, fence it off? And the reason they want to do this too, fence off our creeks, is because the Natural Resource Management Board says that we need pristine water. They don't want animal faeces going into our waterways. Well, in actual fact, microorganisms feed off animal faeces. It's part of the ecology. Now, by planting all this prickly acacia on our waterways, in the summertime, when the creeks dry up, it's going to be a wick for a major bushfire. Absolutely disgraceful. So, and in the winter time, you're going to get the vegetation clogging up our waterways. We're going to get more flooding. There's no common sense in that. And I think in Queensland here, the government actually gives the farmers subsidies to pull it out.
Yes, Pauline, we had a chapter in a book Jai and I recently read called Give Us Back Our Country, in which the question was, why do they hate our farmers? Is it your impression that there seems to be a campaign against the interests of farmers in this country?
Yes, I do. And I agree with what Peter is saying there. I've actually spoken out in protest about government policy since I was first elected to Parliament in 1996. And I travelled Australia extensively and I spoke to many farmers. They've actually put that much red tape on. They're shutting down the farmer. They're not encouraging them to actually plant the crops, to encourage their families to maintain the farming tradition in Australia. What I'm concerned about is free trade. That's what it's all about. Free trade, bringing the food produce from overseas countries into Australia, which are destroying our own industries here. Case in point, our orange growers. We brought in oranges from Brazil, the concentrated orange juice, and we're using that product to supplement. If you buy an orange juice in Australia and it says Australian made, it only has to have a minute amount of Australian produce in it, and it's all foreign product. So what happened was they're ripping out the orange trees or burning them because it's no use anymore. This is only one case of one product. What's going to happen? They're going to destroy the apple growers in Tasmania by bringing the produce in via Tasmania, which is coming not via New Zealand, coming via Chile. So at the end of the day, if we are going to become a country that cannot feed ourselves, we're left at the mercy of the rest of the world. We must protect our food bowl. And not only that, we're known throughout the world for our produce, and we have the best produce in the world. Let's keep that. Why is the government doing this to us? Why are they destroying our farmers?
If I can just add one point on that, I think you made a very good point there. There must surely be a group, future generations who want to stay on the land, they want to work that land, but governments aren't encouraging this. And not only do they need to not only encourage it, but I mean, they're putting blocks in the road to prevent this from happening.
Why would any young person want to go on the land with all the regulation, red and green tape that is actually destroying us farmers? 4 farmers a week Australia-wide are committing suicide. That is a disgrace. Agriculture is our biggest money earner, puts $155 billion a year into the Australian economy. Manufacturing, 100, mining, 80 billion. So there's got to be an agenda here. Why would you bite the hand that feeds you? And
Peter,
that's exactly what's happening.
Peter, I was very moved when I heard you talking about what I thought was completely un-Australian, that is the practice of the National Resources Management Board spying on farmers, using all sorts of techniques to catch out farmers allegedly clearing their land, cutting down a tree or doing something like that, which might be very difficult to get permission for. And you told some of the stories. What were some of the more outrageous examples of that?
Look, these are not stories. In fact, last night on 5AA, a talkback show in South Australia, a guy rang in, and he doesn't live far from me actually, and they said that he was taking water illegally from the River Bremer, and 11 o'clock at night, the Department of Water was driving on this easement where he had access to, and he saw this vehicle coming towards him, bright lights and everything, and he put his hands up and they hit him and dragged him about 40 or 50, I say paces, but yards or metres, whatever you want, and he ended up in hospital, 7 days in hospital. Nothing has been done to these people. There was 3 of them in this vehicle. Nothing has been done. They come onto your property and say, look, we're allowed to be here. No, they're not. They've got to give 48 hours notice for a start. They tell farmers, we can fine you for shifting a rock. A friend of mine at Victor Harbour on the Fleurieu Peninsula got fined $35,000 for clearing a bit of silt out of a creek. Actually helped environmental flow. This group, this Natural Resource Management Board, are a mob of Nazis. It's communism at its best. They're using the environment and water as their tool to control us. And I can tell you now, farming in South Australia is not sustainable. In my particular council area, Alexandrina Council, our rate since 2005 has gone up 65%. Now, there's certain, in the eastern Mount Lofty ranges, farmers that have got a water licence are getting bills the right to take water, whether you use it or not. So what I say to people listening to this today, how far is that going to go? The right to use sunlight, the right to use the wind, the right to use the air we breathe. Hitler was an environmentalist, and I use the word mentalist because, have a look what he did in Germany. He pulled farmers off the land, put government in and called it collective farming.
Was it a mistake, do you think, to separate the title to water, the right to water, from the land?
That was, and you might be able to correct me on this, Pauline, that was John Howard in 2007, I think, with the COAG agreement, National Water Initiative, when he separated water from land and made water a tradable commodity. It is disgraceful.
What have they done with the bore water?
In the bore water in South Australia now, you have to have a metre on your bores. Now they're putting certain metres on dams, all at the farmer's expense. Why do you need a metre on a bore and a metre on a dam as well? If you pump out of that bore into that dam if it's dry, you already know how much water's gone in there. But why do we need metres on a dam? Because if it's a 10 meg dam and you've used half the water, and I'm not an academic, I mean I'm a dill, I left school at 14. In fact I didn't do much high school. But if you've got a dam and it's a 10 meg dam and you've used half the water, to me there's 5 meg left, you don't need a metre. This is just control. Our food production is in serious problem, and I think the Abbott government have got to really wake up to what's happening here and stand tall and just say, look, I know the Natural Resource Management Act of 2004 is a state issue, but we need decent people in at the next state election, either as independents in the upper house to repeal this sort of rubbish. Otherwise, I can tell you right now, we will be net food importers in this country, and that puts us in a very vulnerable and dangerous situation.
It doesn't sound to me like you're asking for anything extraordinary. It seems to me that you're asking for government to really get out of the way on this and stop putting blocks in the road. You're not asking for some special treatment.
Exactly. Look, all as we're asking, Jai, is the right to grow a clean, healthy food product for South Australia and for the export market. The world wants our food. They know how clean and healthy it is. Is that too much to ask?
And the use of water that does not belong to the governments or anyone else. So if the water's in the ground, it's there for the person to use. And I've got to ask the question, why are governments forcing the farmers not to have dams on their properties for irrigational purposes, which was shut down in Queensland in about 2007? So you can't build a dam. If you build a dam over a certain size, it's picked up by satellite surveillance. And I'll go back to the whole thing. Agenda 21, with its world control of the water, to privatise the water throughout the world. Again, who's going to make the money? Big business. Correct. At the detriment of just a small person who wants to get on with their daily life, whether it be the farmer. But don't think that just because it's a farmer at this stage, it will be the average person in their little home, in their suburbs, in the cities, that is going to be hit with the cost of water. Because guess what? Big business wants their buck out of it.
It's funny you say that, Pauline, because I went to the Global Food Forum in Sydney a few months ago, and I couldn't believe it, and I won't mention the guy's name, but there was a banker, and they were interviewing him, and he said that I bought water at a very cheap price, and I'm going to make heaps out of water, and I don't own any land. So how good's that?
So exactly right. Why do you think the Chinese are buying up the land and the properties here? It's for the water rights, because they own the water rights.
The curious thing about dairy farming is that the politicians really brought dairy farming to an end in many respects in Australia a few years ago. But now they're being sold to foreign owners, mainly Chinese, for this, what they call paddock to plate. That is, the milk will be made here and sent to China. Yeah. Probably will not pass through the taxation system because the same person will own it.
Well, David, are you aware of the 1953 double taxation agreement? If Australia is a signatory to another country, and we're signatory to most countries around the world, that if that company from that country does business in Australia, they don't pay their tax here in Australia. They pay tax back in their own country,
Correct.
and vice versa. An Australian company in that foreign country, they pay the tax back here. So the thing is that the Australian government says, yes, come on down, we want your investment, we want your business. So they come down here and they set up their businesses. A lot of them bring in their own staff, employ their own people, and then they make their profits. Guess what? They don't pay tax here. They pay their tax back in their own country. We're fools.
We are. Jai and I went to a seminar a few months ago. There were two ranchers from Alabama, brought in by Amy McGrath, and they spoke about, they'd realised, they looked at certain government maps, they realised that their ranches were going to become wilderness areas. They were destined to be wilderness. Vast parts of the state of Alabama were to become wilderness. And they began a movement which would make it illegal to apply the principles of Agenda 21 in the state of Alabama. And they actually got legislation passed by the houses of the parliament there, the Congress there, and eventually the governor, who was reluctant, eventually signed the bill. And it's now part of the law of Alabama that
That's great.
It is against the law in that state for any...
But it's people power. People got up off their backsides to actually fight for something that they believe in. And that's what we as Australians should do. And I get fed up with hearing about the younger generation who are being brainwashed through our educational system to this way of thinking. They have no interest in politics. They have no interest in their country. We'll all be this happy little utopia. And they don't think for themselves. And I think that, Australians need a good shake-up. Listen and to the older generation and understand what is happening to your country, because you know what? We're getting towards the end of our lives. It is you, it's your future. And why I'm fighting for this is for my children and for my grandchildren. But, I tell you what, I would say to any Australian out there, stop being so apathetic and making sure you sit down and follow your football and whatever else sport is on the TV set, which you're so enthralled about, but you don't take the time to take an interest in your politics and what it means to you and your country and your future.
But do Australians have the tools that they need at the moment? So what you're saying is perfectly correct. I think people have disengaged largely from the system, probably because they've been disillusioned with both sides of politics. But do they have the tools to actually have a binding say? And I don't think they do. One of the things that we're proposing is to give them those tools where when you see something like this, which clearly goes against common sense and what I think most people would expect, but the political class seems intent on doing, people can stop them doing it. That's where they can have a real and direct say.
Keeping them naive and stupid, because where it's happened is the educational system.
Yes. I did a Google search when I was talking to you about what your plight in South Australia into the Natural Resources Management Board, because I was trying to look up any newspaper articles about this. I couldn't find any. Are there many, which were critical? I was looking for a critique, not just
on our website or just in
no, just general in the South Australian media. And what I was looking for was something which was a critique of what was happening there, and all I could find were reports which were effectively reproductions of government press releases.
No, look, the whole point of the thing is naturally it's government. Natural resource management is government, and you're only going to hear all the good news stories, and that's the biggest problem we've got, and that's why it's so important to have things like this today to get the word out. And I must commend you, David and Jai, and especially Alan Metcalf for doing this, and so we can get the message out there. It's so important because the situation is at the moment with all the lefties and everything like that, they don't want us to have our say, and we know what the media is like today.
I don't think it's only the lefties, Peter. I think it's right.
I think you're correct.
I think it's right across the whole spectrum of the political scene. Is whoever it is. They just do not seem to be directing policy in the best interest of Australia or the people.
We saw that in New South Wales with the Natural Vegetation Act. The government promised to review this. They got a report which suggested amendment, and it was not the government which introduced legislation. It was the Fishers and Shooters Party, a small party in the upper
Yes.
house who were
Yep.
inclined more to protect the farmers than the government. And the government, the latest I've read about it is that the government appears to be trying to backtrack and weaken provisions in the legislation. This is just about the farmers' right to reasonably clear their land. As the representative of the Fishers and Speakers Party, Mr. Brown, said when he introduced the bill, he said, farmers are natural environmentalists. It's in their interests to maintain the environment, and they're not going to do silly things, but they don't need this constant supervision by people who are suspicious of them, who are hostile to them, and who are really trying to take them over.
I think the biggest problem is too, when I talk to people in the city, you know, and I tell them about our plight and the Natural Resource Management Act of 2004, and they say, gee, you know, you poor devils. And I say, well, don't feel sorry for us, because you all pay a Natural Resource Management levy. The NRM, as we call it, Natural Resource Management Board, monitors the metropolitan area. So it's not just farmers. So when I talk about non-complying fines, it's in the metropolitan area. You know, seize financial documents. Last year, they wanted to take away our right to remain silent. Flag Australia lobbied and lobbied. We've still got our right to remain silent. In other words, if the NRM come in and wanted your financial documents, you said, no, sorry, I want to get a lawyer. They wanted to take that right away from us. They wanted NRM to come onto our properties without a warrant. The police can't even come on without a warrant.
Who controls the upper house in South Australia?
Well, that's interesting. Now the Labor government, because there's a little independent called Jeff Brock who sided with the Labor government, so now they hold the balance of power. But look, I tell you what, our Liberals are pretty weak there too, and I have to say that because last year in the Legislative Council, the Liberal Party supported low flow bypasses and meters on dams. So how good's that? So what hope have we got? None.
You don't have a national party in South
Australia? No, we certainly don't.
But Flag is not a political party. Flag's not standing up for farmers and growers, yes.
What Flag Australia is about is the right to grow a clean, healthy food right on our freehold property without this bureaucratic madness, and we stand for freedom of speech, freedom of choice, and we just want to be left alone and farm. And we've paid for our water. When we've bought our properties, we've paid for our water, and now they want to charge us a right to take water levy, whether we use it or not, and also in my area, in the Eastern Mount Lofty Ranges and the Angus Bremer catchment, we're not allowed to put in any more dams. So if I had 5 titles and I wanted to give one of my titles to my children to farm, and let's say there wasn't a bore there and the dam's dried up in the summer, I'll put a bore in, but you might not strike water, or the water you strike might be too salty. That land is rendered useless. This is what they're doing. People have got to realise what's happening here. They're reducing our food bowl in every way possible, and we've got to stop this nonsense.
How can people find out more information about Flag, and in particular, what should people be doing to give a voice to this issue and certainly to support you in your initiatives?
Well, they can go onto our website, www.flagaustralia.org, and they can see that what we've been up to and what we're fighting. But what people really need to do is, currently in South Australia with the Labor government, is bombard their office, the Minister for Environment and Water, Ian Hunter, and just say this is not good enough. The Agricultural Minister, and just say we are not going to vote for you the next election if you don't start changing this NRM Act of 2004, because that's destroying us.
But also to become a member of Flag.
Oh,
and I think it's very important, because what's your membership? Peter, $30. $30, which helps you, out there, fight these causes, stand up for the Australian people, stand up for the farmer. And what's $30 to a lot of Australians? Well, I think get behind Flag.
Am I your only member from Bondi Beach?
Yes, you are.
See,
we're very privileged there. But no, I mean that, David. I thank you for your support. But no, thanks for that, Pauline. I suppose I should be probably saying a little bit more about Flag Australia, and I find it hard to ask people for money.
It's a national organisation, but you can't do it for yourself. And I know you're constantly putting your own hand in your own pockets. It's a foundation that you're the founding member of it, but because you stood up for yourself to fight for an issue, you're a farmer, you're a man of the land, you love it with a passion, and you see yourself being shut down. But not only that, So many other farmers have come to David for his help and his assistance because they're going to shut them down. They couldn't use their water on their property. Now, he stood up and fought for them, and he's won many a case for many people.
Yes. Pauline, are you the same as I am? When you go into, say, a shop and it's fish, it's been brought in from Southeast Asia,
I won't buy it.
or the asparagus from Peru. I wonder, well, in what conditions were they grown? Was it grown
Exactly
in the
right.
pristine environment of Australia?
Oh, certainly not.
And I suspect it probably wasn't.
Well, haven't we seen programs that actually they fertilise in other countries, that they fertilise the crops that we probably are eating with raw sewage,
Raw sewage.
human sewage, and they put so many restrictions on our farmers on the growing techniques here, yet we don't have that same restrictions put onto the imports that we bring into Australia and how they grow their foods.
Good old free trade agreement.
Yes, to show how silly governments can be. Do you remember the previous government was going to restrict even more fishing in Australia by Australians?
Yes.
So what would happen, of course, would be that the same fish would be captured by other people to the north of us or in Australian waters or outside Australian waters, but our fishermen were to be damaged.
Yeah.
We were to ruin an industry.
Well, that's what's happened in South Australia. The marine parks and sanctuary zones are ridiculous, and it's a situation where, rural towns are just going to be absolutely decimated. So they're stitching up our food bowl in the sea and on the land. That's what's happening. Unless we get big change, we're in serious trouble, I believe. I just can't believe politicians. It's going to affect them in the end. And their families, their friends, their relatives. I mean, what's going on?
They don't care. They got their jobs in Parliament, they got their safe seats, so look, we won't rock the boat. So a lot, I believe, go in with very good intentions, but the whole fact is they get caught up with the system, become career politicians. And then they sort of say, you rock the boat, you won't get pre-selection for that political party at the next election. So they sit back and they just become yes people. So whichever side the bells ring, they walk in the house, oh yes, there's the whip, yep, that's where my leader is, I'll follow and I'll sit there. And most of the time, I guarantee, nearly all the time, they have no idea what they're voting on or what they're voting for. They've become yes people for a political party without really representing their electorate. And I think that we need to go back to, at Federation, we actually had independents that stood for Parliament. Those independents all came together. They then looked after their electorate and voted on issues that affected their electorate and what they thought was in the best interest of Australia. We need to think clearly about, do we want these political parties and the yes people, or do we want strong, like-minded Australians who are prepared to stand up and fight for our way of life, our standard of living, and for this country as we know it.
How hard what you're saying is perfectly true, it's spot on. How hard is it for an independent to get up these days when you look at the two major political parties and the way that they've really become like two competing major brands, and people vote one way or the other, but there's really very little space for other smaller parties or independents to get in?
Extremely hard, because I tell you what, when I got elected to Parliament in 1996, and I started my political party. Towards the end of the next election, which was the end of 1998, just prior to that election, John Howard and the Liberal Party changed the voting. So instead of making it optional preferential, where you could tick 1, 2, or how many boxes you wanted, that was, you had to fill out every box on that voting ticket. So what all the political parties did on their how to vote tickets, telling their voters, put Pauline, Hanson and One Nation last. So therefore, we didn't get the preferences. We won a lot of seats on the primary vote. I won my seat on the primary vote, but it was Labor Party's preferences that put the Liberal Party candidate in. I had 36% of the vote, he had 21% of the vote. He won the seat on Labor Party's preferences. And that's what they do. Even though you're a high-profiled person standing as an independent, if the political parties get against you and they don't want you there, they'll tell their voters to preference you last. But I'll tell you, listeners, when you go to vote, you own your vote. You don't have to follow the how to vote card. That is only a guide by the political party. It is up to you to decide who do you want first in, then your second choice, then your third, and so on. Control your vote. Know where it's going, why you're voting for that person. And yes, there has been some independents that we might think, oh, we really don't want them, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there's a lot of strong-minded, good people who would be fantastic independents, and we need that balance in our parliaments.
Why do we tend to see it a lot more at local council levels? There's a lot of independence. I mean, obviously it's the mechanisms and the way it works around that, but I think people are open to the idea of an independent, but it's the machinations of the parties that seem to push those things out.
One of the contrasts, I think, is if you watch Question Time at Westminster, you'll see when the Speaker asks for questions, a number of MPs will stand to attract his attention. In Australia, it's all scripted, it's choreographed, and not only on the opposition side are the questions prepared in advance, and the person is designated to stand. The same happens in relation to the government.
Not with me.
Not with you, no,
it wasn't when I was an independent.
But you would have only had a third. You would have only had you wouldn't have had many chances.
No, we only had one question in 6 weeks as an independent. That's all I could actually get up.
But with the parties, it's all
they're
prearranged.
Scripted, because then they get to ask the minister a question. So it gave the minister his platform to stand up there and pat himself on the back for a job that he's done.
And these are questions without notice.
Yes.
And of course they're questions with notice. And the minister invariably stands up and thanks the member for the question. They should thank the whip for the question, because the whip wrote the question for them.
Yeah, fair enough too.
Yes.
Well, it beggars belief. We've been discussing a range of important issues which are important not only to our farmers but to our national security. We encourage you to be involved and to get have your voice known on these issues. You can have a direct say at flagaustralia.org, as well as joining the broader debate on Twitter using the hashtag GUBOC, G-U-B-O-C, which is Give Us Back Our Country, as well as engaging with Pauline, who's on Twitter, and myself and David using the Twitter handles at Prof David Flint and at Jai Martinkovits. Until next time, this is Give Us Back Our Country. I'm Jai Martinkovits. Australia is one of the world's oldest continuing democracies, yet our institutions of representative democracy have been compromised.
They've been compromised by the power brokers, the faceless men in the major political parties.
Many of our politicians today seem to be lacking the basic common sense, good judgment and decency of the average Australian.
The agenda they're applying with the inner city elites would just not pass the pub test.
Yeah, obviously everyone's got their vote and they have their little bit of a say, but in the end of the day, the politicians do what they want, not really what we want.
I'm basically held accountable in my position. However, the politicians are not held accountable between elections. So they might come out and say one thing at the start of their campaign, and then as they become elected, they do the completely opposite.
Yeah, they're not thinking in the people, they think of themselves in the pocket.
I don't think much of them, to be honest.
I think they just say what people really want them to hear.
It's unfair.
Yeah, when the politicians say something, I don't always believe it.
I think they do no justice to our vote. We vote for them, we honestly believe what they're going to say. If they don't fulfil it, then we hopefully get rid of them next time.
If they should make a promise, they should keep it.
I guess it's not very fair on the people who make the promises to, I guess.
I don't know how you change it to make it any better, but I'm sure there's a better way.
They should be kicked out.
Increasingly, Australians are demanding that our politicians be truly accountable, not just every 3 or 4 years in blank cheque elections.
Truly accountable, as nurses, doctors and journalists are accountable on every day of every week, of every month and of every year, just as you are.